Inflation confronts us at every turn. After a probable peak in July, the 8.5% annual rise in prices is still near 4-decade highs. So how far will the Fed go to bring down inflation? Let's bring in former Fed insider and CEO of Quill Intelligence, Danielle DiMartino Booth. Danielle, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
With monthly inflation stabilizing in July, do you think that's a sign that the steps the Fed is taking are working, or was it a one-off?
I think that there are many signs that the Fed is achieving its goal of destroying demand. And if that's the aim in order to make housing cool off, which we're clearly seeing, then the Fed is achieving one of its goals of beginning to temper inflation. But there are so many other sources that suggest, whether it's food or housing is 40% of the CPI, that suggest that the Fed's battle has not nearly begun, much less ended. This is no mission accomplished moment. The Fed has a lot more work to do, even though we are seeing signs that tightening monetary policy, that rising interest rates are indeed slowing the economy, which we know is one of the Fed's stated goals at this point.
Where do Fed rate hikes go from here?
So I think investors are underestimating the Fed's resolution, their will to continue tightening. The biggest contributor to inflation is housing. That's a 40% input to your headline CPI. And we anticipate to see that number actually move up as we head into the fall before peaking and rolling over. We call that the stickiest kind of inflation. And even though we've seen, obviously, prices at the gas pump come down, we still have food inflation at the highest level since 1979.
Okay, so you kind of touched on this, but as far as market reaction goes, what do you think investors are seeing in this economy right now and how they're reacting to inflation numbers, to other indicators we're seeing? And are those investors right, or are they too hopeful at this point?
I think investors are giving a whole new meaning to bad news being good. And that is, if you see the Empire State Manufacturing Survey collapse to the lowest level in its history back to 2001, they're like, that's fantastic. The recession's even worse than we thought it was. If you see building starts or building permits also collapse to levels that we last saw in the last housing bust, investors are like, even better. This really is going to put the Fed on hold and prevent the Federal Reserve from tightening. Yes, the Fed has pivoted in the past. And in the past, when the economy has slowed, the Fed has reacted by loosening policy. But all of those past episodes that we refer to for the past 40 years, inflation was less than 2%. Today, it's more than 4 times that level.
Something we haven't spent a ton of time talking about is the Fed's balance sheet. We know that they're about to double the rate at which they're shrinking the balance sheet at a time when we do have 2 quarters of negative GDP and some pretty miserable consumer confidence out there. That, coupled with the aggressive rate hikes we're seeing, do you think a soft landing is still in reach?
No, I don't. My favorite GDP model, that of S&P Global, shows that the third quarter estimate right now is 0.4%. So we're within a hiccup away of the third quarter being the third consecutive negative print in a row, which would really leave little doubt in anybody's mind about the possibility of a soft landing. So I don't think that there are very many people on the street who continue to talk about the possibility of a soft landing, absent those perhaps in the White House.
How aggressive do you think the Fed will be with these rate hikes? I know we're awaiting a decision now in September.
So I think that a lot of investors are contemplating and anticipating that the Fed is going to pause after the September meeting. And in fact, I have publicly advocated for the Fed to pause specifically for the November meeting because it's 6 days before Election Day, and to call for a blackout that continues through Election Day and then resume rate hikes at the December meeting. But to your point that you brought up earlier, there's this issue of shrinking the balance sheet, quantitative tightening. I anticipate that even though the Fed may pause in its rate hike campaign, that it may keep going in the background, so to speak. Those are words that Chair Powell himself has used, that the Fed may continue with the quantitative tightening in the background, which depletes and pulls liquidity from the financial system and still acts as a form of tightening in the financial system.
Do you have any guesses on where you think inflation could get to by year's end?
You know, there are so many conflicting disinflationary forces on the discretionary side. We're seeing used car prices really begin to come down hard. We expected to see that. But there are so many conflicting discretionary inflationary prints that are going down versus your housing and your food inflation, which seem to be stubbornly high. It's very hard to say, but I would not be surprised if we had something in the realm of 6 to 7% by the time we get to the new year. It's entirely feasible, again, giving housing's big weight in the CPI, 40%.
I'm sure you've heard the word, and I want to get your take on it. Recession or vibe session right now?
I think that what we are looking at right now is as plain vanilla a recession as we possibly could have. I understand that a lot of people think that the Fed is engineering what we're seeing right now and that things really are all good and well. But if you look at what's happening in China and you look at what's happening in Germany, the third largest exporting nation in the world, and the rest of Europe, and the slowing that we're seeing in Asia, you'd have to be blind to suggest that the United States was going to avoid a recession given the simple pressure coming from outside of the rest of the world, in addition to the slowing that we've seen here domestically.
Great points. Quill Intelligence CEO Danielle DiMartino-Booth, thank you so much for being with me today.